What up? What up? What up? Hope everybody's having a great start to your week. Um, Sorry it took me a little second to get all this stuff together. My first time, oh, okay. First time using this new platform, so I'm using StreamYard so that you have a better experience, and wanted to make sure that this is working. So we're going to be streaming now from now on several different streaming platforms. So if it looks a little bit different, that's why. By all means, let me know if it's coming in clear or if you're having any like issues so that we can make sure all that stuff is up to date. Outside of that, y'all hope that everybody's having a great start to their week. And we are going to get into some conversations today. Just getting a little stuff set up, a few things set up here because I'm not sure how this all works just yet. So I'm just making sure I can see everybody can see the good stuff. So first and foremost, I want everybody to remember that this is a conversation, not a lecture. So if you do have any thoughts or concerns, questions, any of those different types of things, by all means, let me know, and I will happily pass that on, and we'll continue to have that conversation. Um, but today I wanted to talk about as we continue developing your script. So on this conversation, this channel, we'll be having conversations about how to develop your wardrobe beyond all of the in your life as well as your style, beyond all of the basic tenets that you've been thinking about, hearing about, for what you're supposed to go buy, why you're supposed to go buy it. And actually, a lot of people don't even talk about why you're supposed to go buy it. And if you haven't been rocking with me for a little while, then you may not know that every man has a story and that that story soon becomes history or his story. If he is courageous enough to author it, a lot of guys aren't. A lot of guys are following trends. They are listening to somebody else's influence, and they aren't ahead that is actually giving them insights and guidance to the spaces that they want to be. So my first goal for every guy is for him to see himself so that he can ultimately be himself. Right when he steps out, that everybody will know him for who he is and what he wants to represent. And if he can do that, he's always going to show up and show out in style. All he has to do is stick to his script, right? So for us, that is always going to involve your consciousness, the construction of your wardrobe, so that it ultimately communicates the best version of manuscript. Is always the man that you are, the uniform that you're creating, the attention to self, then talking about your closet, your rotation, which is what we're going to talk about today, your identity within your industry, your presentation, and ultimately how that will transform who you are for other people around you. So, again, this is for the live men. It's not necessarily for the freshmen who just want to know the difference between a notch lapel and peak lapel, but you can get some of that stuff too. If you have those questions, by all means, let those be known. But this is really about personal development through personal presentation. And so, one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation about how your rotation affects your reputation is because this happened to a young guy that I was not mentoring, but was giving a little bit of guidance to every now and then. When we would see him step out, he was working in a clothing store first, right? A pretty well known clothing store. And so every time I would see him, he was always suited, booted, had his tie working, three-piece suit on, and was always looking dapper, was always looking well put together. And I remember we saw him out one night, and all of a sudden he had on J's and a t-shirt, and then had his fitted cap on, but then had it flipped up. You remember, like, she's got to have his style, or when Michael Jordan was doing the commercials back in the 90s. Spike Lee would have his cap flipped up, so he had that on, and I remember feeling a little disappointed, and I felt disappointed because I felt like it wasn't one of these things was not true to who he was, right? And when I pulled him to the side, I just asked him. I was curious, again, a little disappointed, but I was curious. I was like, bro, well, what's going on? Like, I normally see you dressed, suited, and booted, and now I see you on the streetwear tip. And now, is this you? And he was like, well, normally, like, now I like dressing in suits. I like being dressed up, but the ladies like it when I'm dressed like this. And I said, well, how do you know that? And he was like, well, I went to this one party and I was dressed kind of nice and I got clown for it. And I said, but you just went to one party? He was like, yeah, I just went to one party. And I said, oh, I mean, okay, cool. I can respect the honesty there. I said, now what would happen if a potential client or a client that you're working with saw you out like this? Like, would you, the same as when you normally are in your working space? And he kind of dropped his head, kind of ashamed, like, nah, like, man, nah, I really wouldn't. And I remember where I was like, damn, I wasn't trying to shame him. I wasn't trying to make him feel bad, but I really wanted him to think through why he was wearing what he was wearing. And it was because, some of the wise older elders used to tell me it can take a lifetime for you to build a reputation. And then it can be completely destroyed in an instant. So you went through all these processes to build your reputation, and then one bad decision shut all that stuff off, right? It completely changes the way people perceive you just based off of their experience, even though you did all these other things right, right? And so I want to make sure that you guys, when you are thinking about cultivating your wardrobe, that you're thinking about the reputation that's going to be behind it. I believe last week I was talking on IG Live, since again I'm streaming on several different spaces, that there was a scene in Malcolm X where West Indian Archie believes that Red, at the time, Malcolm Little, is giving him wrong numbers and he's trying to like get over him. And he says, his rep is on the line, is yours, right? So if you think about it, especially as you get older, the more cohesive and consistent your wardrobe is, the more you're going to find that people start to associate identity with something they can put together. So a lot of guys will see me and they'll say like, well, Michael, why do you always dress up? Well, the truth is, one, that's what I really have in my wardrobe. But two, it was because very early on my sartorial journey and my stylistic journey, I started to realize like I wanted to make sure that I was showing up with a certain level of expression, with a certain level of experience, with a certain level of elevation when I was stepping into spaces. And so for me, it wasn't just good enough for me to be in a space and on Wednesday I was looking like a bum, right? Or I was looking overly stylish, no longer sartorial. It was important for me to always look like I was the man when I was walking through. Always look like I was cohesive and consistent when I was walking through. And so because of that, then I started to garner a certain level of following where people were like, oh yeah, that's the cat in the hat when I was in New York. When I was early on in my sartorial journey, I had a nickname in college for being Mike Smooth, right? And it wasn't because of my charm and my charisma. I didn't have any riz, right? I hate that word, but it's fitting, right? My freshman year, I was a romantic, a little socially awkward, but because of my style, I began to become associated with being smooth. Now, an interesting thing happened for me in that space is as I began to adopt that moniker, I realized I didn't have to move as fast. Um, I was a little anxious a lot of times, especially when it came to talking to young ladies. So I would, excuse me, how you doing? My name is Michael. Like, I just think you're really beautiful. And all it did was just allowed me to start slowing down my pace. Excuse me, how are you doing? My name is Michael, and I would have regretted if I didn't come over here and say, hello to you. Now, I also had the ability to do that because it was 600 people on our campus and 4 ladies. So it gave me a little bit of practice, but I had the opportunity to really start to adopt the persona at the time, right? And so, in that same regard or in that same space, you can find that the more consistent that you are, the more it will align with your identity or with your perceived identity in that space, right? And so, as I began to adopt that thought process, being romantic, wanting to be charming, and wanting to be sensual, since I've been young, I've been very much romantic, very much a sensual type of guy, a sensory type of guy, sights, smells, sounds, all of those things. I now had a way to encapsulate that and to wrap that into how I was showing up. We're going to talk about how I did that in 2 seconds, right? So, lastly, what that ended up communicating was a reputation for how I was moving in social spaces. And when they became personal spaces, there was an alignment when I was on misalignment in some cases when I was bringing a young lady back to a space that wasn't reflective of the type of life that I was living. So when I was talking about the enrapturing or enwrapping the persona that I had with my presentation, what do I mean? Well, if you've been rocking with me for a little while, and if you haven't, that's okay. I want you to think about the 3 words that you would say describe me, right? You can put them in the chat, and so that we can see them. You can share them if you are so inclined. But we've done this before. I want you to think of 3 words that are going to represent your personality and or your persona, right? So just think about that. You don't have to share them, but if you want to, you can put them in the chat. I'll read them out if if you're brave enough to put it out there. But for me, like I said, I wanted to be charming, I wanted to be sensual, and I wanted to have a little bit older. So for me, the sensuality was about was about a feeling that I could provide when I was interacting with people. So for a long time, I've appreciated linen in the summertime and the way that it wrinkles, right? The way that it is able to create this movement in the imperfections. And a lady asked me, she's like, "Why are you linen so much? It wrinkles. It's messy. It's not really like smooth in a literal standpoint." And I said, because it often reminds me of sheets after a morning or evening play, right? The disruption, the fun and exciting, chaotic disruption that comes from a man and a woman sleeping together. And it doesn't have to be anything sexual per se, but just the closeness, the movement that will happen in the bedroom when you find yourself comfortable with somebody, engaging with somebody, and enriched with somebody else's presence. The movements that happen in that bedroom will usually bring us to a morning with disrupted sheets. Sometimes sheets are off the bed. Sometimes the bed sheets that were hugging the corners may have slightly become ajar, right? Because of the movement and the comfort, or sometimes the discomfort that comes with the sheets. And so I was like, I love that correlation with you wearing linen. The young lady was kind of like, okay, you think a little bit different, right? She was intrigued, and that led to a great conversation for the rest of the evening. But that's where it was stemming from, was right, the textural elements that came into play that allowed me to express myself in a certain way. In the fall and winter, I love a great corduroy because the ribbing of the different cores, right? And for any of you guys corduroy, you that will allow for the texture to look much smoother or much more robust and much more present when you're wearing it. And so young ladies would often rub their hand against that texture of the corduroy and would be like, yo, this feels different. This is a different experience, right? You can see the same thing with velvets, which is another fabric that I love wearing in the fall and winter, right? Or a great flannel that drapes extremely well, that moves when you are moving, right? When I move, you move type situations. And so there were all of these different elements that, from a textual standpoint, that made things sensual, right? And if I was talking slowly, paying attention to my pace, and being intentional with the conversations that I was having, well, then the reputation then became associated with a little bit of sensuality, right? When for me, I wasn't making an attempt to be smooth or suave. That wasn't one of my three words, right? But the charm would deflect a little bit of my presentation onto others. So if you ever have paid attention or read the book, The Art of the star power that she is, right? I love that aspect of who she is and how she is there. But I am a great compliment, and I'm a great compliment in that space because I look like I belong. There's been plenty of times where I've talked to young ladies with a guy that I could potentially be working with, and they'll say, "Listen, my husband, my man, my boyfriend needs to elevate his game. I love him. I appreciate him for who he is, but every time that we're out, I've been approaching. This isn't one or two young ladies, and this is one or two times. There's been numerous times where young ladies were out and then they've been approached by men because they think she's single. And then she'll be like, "No, my husband is here." Like, not that she was even entertaining the conversation, but she's like, "No, my husband is here." And they'll be like, "Where he at?" And she'll be like, "Oh, he's over here." And she's not proud to point him out. And two, they are like, Yo, that's who you with? That's how you like for real? That's him, right? And they're questioning how they are together. And so there's been some conversations sometimes where I've had to initiate a different type of conversation for that individual, right? And so in those spaces, I wanted to deflect my light onto other people. So when I was hanging with my homies, I don't necessarily want to be the guy who stands out. I know that I will be sometimes, but that's not the goal, right? And then the whimsy of it was helping people get back to a space of the classic nature of things, right? Where there was a time when cats dressed up to go out. There was a time when cats made sure that they were on point when they were interacting with individuals, right? There was a way that you seduced a young lady. There was a way that you held a conversation amongst your peers. There was a way that you engaged when confrontation was happening, right? There was just ways that you would operate that were different from the standard way of moving, right? And so there is a whimsy, there's a whimsical nature that comes with that. So much so that I've had people, walk up to me and say, "Man, you remind me of the '20s." When I first moved to New York, I stepped off. I was coming up from a was a cat who, street cat, and he was like, "Yo, man, like you remind me of the Roaring '20s, dressing." And I was surprised that he said it because of his demeanor. He Tim's jeans, leather, like, and looked like a street cat. Looked great, but like street cat. He was like, man, but like it's great to see brothers dressing up, and I really found that empowering, one, but also a beautiful space of respect from a brother as well, right? Then I ended up going downtown. This old Jewish lady was on the bus and she was wealthy, and wealthy people ride the bus in New York. Excuse me. And oh, great. You remind me of when I was young because she was probably 80, 85, right? She was an old bird. She was a beautiful old bird, right? And so we were conversing, and she was just like, "It's so great to see young men well dressed." Right. So there was a touch of something nostalgic, a touch of something that was able to be associated with a fond memory. And so in those spaces, I want you to think about the three words that are going to represent who you are you're stepping out. And oh man, thank you, gentlemen. Rated. Yes, we're going to be more consistent now that we're here. Right. And so I want you to think about those three words, and I also want you to think about how you are personifying that. What does that look like in your presentation? So after you write down your three words, I want you to think about what that looks like. And in next week's conversation, we'll talk about how to garner some inspiration for those words, to garner some insights for those perspectives that you have and that you want to project when you're putting it out. So, also, if you've been rocking with me for a little while, then you know that I really love the book King Warrior Lover Magician, or King Warrior Magician. I go Love a Magician by Robert Moore. That's where a lot of these conversations are going to stem from on the surface level, if you will. And so I want every man to be a king, a warrior, a lover, and a magician. So when we're talking about your reputation, right? And we're talking about the rotation of your reputation. No woman wants a inconsistent man, whole place, and no dude really wants to hang out or be associated with a guy who's all over the place, who's flip flopping on his perspectives, his philosophy, his perspective when he's stepping out. And the best way for you to present that, one, is remembering that birds of a feather flock together. So if you're a person who claims that he is successful or has aspirations of being successful, but you're hanging around with cats who have no ambition, who are just hanging out on the street or playing their video games all day without any work of being greater, because you can play video games now and be a professional, right? But that's all they're doing, and they don't have any goals or any passions that are driving them or that they're in pursuit of. Then you're doing yourself a grave disservice, and you're actually being a liar if you're saying I'm successful, but those are the people that you're hanging around. And this is because I believe it was Jim Rohn, but also Dale Carnegie, who says uh, you are a reflection of the five people that you hang around the most. And also, for the person, but I believe it was Dale Carnegie, who said, "Show me the five people that you hang around with, and I'll show you where you're going to be in the next 5 years." Successful as our networks. And so when we're thinking about those things, when we're presenting those things, we need to make sure that we are presenting like a person who's successful. Now, there's plenty of ways to look like a successful individual, a person who is reigning, right? You don't have to oppress or to diminish anybody else because you're standing on your square, right? Just because you're ruling your space and making sure that you are representing the best form of who you are when you're standing on that square. So if you're a guy who tends to be a little bit more street driven, a little bit more urban, you can focus on being urbane, right? You can focus on being that highest level of the city type of dweller. That means that you are making sure that your jeans always look straight, right? They don't got to be pressed with the stay flow with the crease down the middle. If you from the south, then you understand what I'm talking about, right? But you want to make sure that your jeans are ironed, or that they are broken in properly, that they are going to be, excuse me, properly proportional for the look that you're wearing, right? If you're a person who says like, no, I like the classic or professional look, my man Vladimir Riche of Chasing, great example of that, also because he's my homie, is a great representation of the consistency that shows up when you are dressed up. But you also want to be in a space where when you're casual, there's still consistency, right? You're still ruling that space when you are stepping out. Sigma 15, I'm trying to preach this tutorial gospel. I'm trying to, right? So, so if I'm stepping out on the casual tip, then still like the royalty, the noble that I am. If we call each other king, which I love, right? Then you should be showing up as a royal, as a nobleman when you're stepping into a space. The space should elevate when you are in it, right? I don't care if you're going to a sports bar to go chill and watch the game. Just because everybody else is in their sports jersey, that's two sizes too big, doesn't mean that you should be, right? And this doesn't mean that you can't be in a sports jersey. I'm not saying that you can't, but if you are a person who wants to be a man of prominence, a man of promotion, a man of elevation, that's probably not how you want to show up, right? You want to show up in a nice polo. Still may have on your team colors, but it's not anything that's going to limit you from maneuvering through different spaces. So we have to be strategic. And if you've been following me for a little while, then you know that a warrior is not a combatant. Those are two different things. A warrior is a strategist. He's being strategic with how he's going to move in a given situation. So if I know that I could potentially meet a young lady, if I know that there could potentially be a business dealing or a network, I don't want to look like the dude who is a person that would not distinguish themselves from a crowd. I'm the type of person who wants to step out and say, no, when somebody meets me, they shake my hand, I am remembered, right? Before I even give them a business card or we exchange information, that they're gonna be like, oh yeah, that dude who had a hat on, right? That cat in the hat. Yeah, I remember him. Yeah. He gave me a call. Oh yeah, bar, the cat in the hat. They'd be like, oh yeah, man, I remember you. What's going on? Right? It makes a much more seamless conversation. If I'm talking to a young lady in a sports bar or in a chill type of space, especially when I was single, that would always set me apart because then it created It created intrigue. I was listening to a dating coach named Ross Jeffries, Ross Jeffries. Trying to make sure I said that right. When I was single, and he said one of the things that a lot of guys overlook because they're focused on the attraction, strictly the attraction, from a physical sexual standpoint, that they miss the opportunity for different components that will create physical or sexual attraction. And one of those things is intrigue, being interested, right? Having somebody who says like, "Yo, it's something about him. Like he seems mysterious. He seems interesting. I should know, right?" When everybody else is going right, you go left, right? So right now in this modern time, we're seeing a lot of people being overtly bold for shock value. We're seeing people being overly sexual for the real or the authentic. Today I can't articulate my words the way I want to, right? From the authentic element, but they don't have any restraint. They have no tact. They have no taste. There's something to be said about a guy who actually knows how to stimulate a woman's imagination by not having to create direct inter engagement that will create the intrigue. Like, man, okay, this cat know what he's talking about. I need to know a little bit more about what he who understands how to take his time and doesn't have to rush into anything because he has options and opportunities. He's not worried about the fact that you are playing a little hard to get. He enjoys action in the chase, right? It is the ability to create those things. Even if I got on a polo, right, and I got on a pair of chinos, jeans, maybe even slacks, depending on how I like to move in that space, with a dope belt and a great pair of shoes, that creates the intrigue. Like, why is he dressed than everybody else here? And then don't let her get close, and then you got on some smell good and a scent that is going to truly embody and represent how you want to move. This is why you have to think about your personal brand. You have to think about what you stand on. You have to think about what you want to represent, how you want to symbolize it, right? Because you that is going to leave a lasting impression when you step through there, following you, right? And so in those spaces, when she sits down and talks to you, strategic about the intention for the attention that I paid to this ensemble in this presentation. And the more consistently you're able to do that, what you're going to find is that then that begins to transform how you see yourself and then ultimately how other people see you. So it becomes that space where when I was in college, and individuals started calling me Mike Smooth. And this was one dude, my homeboy named Duel, right? He used to be like Mike Smooth, and I was like, why? Why you call? He's like, cause you a smooth motherfucker. Like you be putting it together, right? And I was like, oh damn, like okay, like. But he was a guy who was a man of influence, right, in the space before influencers. And the rest of our tribe, our friend group, started calling me Mike Smooth. Well, then after they started calling me Mike Smooth, then other folks started calling me Mike Smooth. And so then it became this ongoing thing that kind of followed me around. And when I got to New York, I really, man, you remind me but but that was something that people started to call me as well. So you'll find that that reputation will then project certain elements and attributes of who you are to others, and that reputation will also transform how others even speak about you before or when you have who will be like, oh, I like your little hat, or I like your little jacket, I like your little vest thing, right? Or And I'd be like, no, I don't think. I know I look good. I, I put this on with intention. But what happened for me, I was around some homegirls, we were just kicking it or whatever. And this young lady had kind of been looking at me, and I was like, fuck, like not in a more, like, oh yeah, she was saying like you doing too much and you must think you all that. She started laughing. She was like, yeah, no, it shows up like dead ass. And I was like, man, you do what you do. Like I can see if you weren't that consistent, or if this was something that you were dressing up for, I still would have defended you because you're my homeboy. But this is you. She knew who you really were, right? And so you'll start seeing that those things happen. It hasn't just happened to me, it's happened to me. Know that my reputation would be given scenario. So I want you to try on really creating a reputation for yourself that will allow you to rule and reign, right? And rulers set measures and the intrigue and interest that you create that will attract the right type of people will begin to transform the way you see yourself and the way that others see you. So if you try that on, go out and be great today. All right. Outside of that, does anybody have to do so? And if not, that's cool too. Ready to invest in yourself, your image, and in the DMs. If you're on social, if you're on YouTube, then you can always DM me or email me at info@stylearchitects.com. So that's info@stylearchitects, and we'll build. You can do that on social as well. So outside of that, I don't see any questions. Don't see any questions. You can always leave them in the chat, and we will get to them. I got a question said, House of Patrick says, so when the individual start calling you smooth every time he see you, did you think he was being a little funny? Um, but it wasn't in an insulting type of way. So it's important for us to remember that we as men, we will make jabs and we'll joke with each other in that type of way, right? But in your brotherhood or within your tribe, you'll notice that nobody else can talk crazy about you or to you. So there was a time when somebody tried to make light of that nickname that they had given me, and he stepped up and was like, what you say? And fam was like, oh yeah, yeah, is that supposed to be funny? And he was like, no, no. And he kind of fell back, right? But even if they are making fun of you or they are trying to make you a jester, the more consistent that you are, the more you're gonna find that imitation becomes a imitation, right? So they'll be trying to make jokes and act like you're doing the most and doing all these other things, and then you'll see that they start showing up that way. There was a time I was young in my early 20s, like I think and I dressed up a certain type of way. And I talk about this in my book, Dress for Success. If you want to intimately align your image, your identity, so that always leaves a lasting impact, and you can go get that book if you're interested in that. Let me know, and I can get that to you. I still have a few copies left, and I'll sign it if you're interested. But I remember who used to clown me all the time about dressing, so much so that he detracted me from dressing for a second. I allowed him to influence me in that way. And I think I saw him like 2 weeks after. He was dressed up, dressed the way that I was dressed. And I was like, bro, I thought that was like, he would say wild stuff, but I was like, I thought that was whatever, right? And he was like, oh, I'm in for you, not for me. I'll make this look good. And from that moment on, I was like, no dude, no person, woman or male, will tell me like what I'm going to do and who I'm going to be and how I'm going to show up. Right. So it is important for you to know who you are. And this is why you have to be the man that you are scripting, right? You have to step into a dressing room and really address who you are and what you want to show up as, so that you can tell that story authentically and truly, knowing that any ridicule is actually respect in a lot of spaces, especially when you know what you're doing. House of Patrick said, yeah, my mom used to say, if they're talking negative or positive about you, either way, they checking you out. Yep, to check and choking your style, biting your style. What we used to say. So yeah, that's very very true. So does anybody else have any questions? Any thoughts? They jocking your style. Okay, I was like choking your style. Pause. Let me check that real quick. Uh, if we don't have any other questions, yo, I really appreciate you guys being on, having this conversation with me, and trying these concepts on, see how they fit you. If they fit you well, I want you to share this with 5 people, right? 5 homies who may need to know it. If any ladies are watching and your dude needs to know about it, then make sure that you pass this on, because it's necessary. It's a deeper dive when it comes to dressing. So I want people to show up as the best version of themselves, because our style truly is a reflection of our state of mind. And it is our attire that tells the world what we think of ourselves, right? It is the narrative that we are continuously projecting before we ever say a word. So align who you are with how you see yourself, the more money you're going to get, the more success you're going to have, and the more sex you're going to have. The more people are going to be attracted to you. And not only will you attract beautiful women, but you'll also attract the right type of women. Mrs. Right is finding the right people and attracting the right people that are going to be the best co-characters for your story, that will continue to edify your reputation, so that when you step out, you no longer have to say the word, because they know that you are the man when you're stepping through. All right. So I want you to try that on, see how it fits you. And if it fits you well, like I said, share that with somebody else. And outside of that, be great today. But then again, you already know that you are. You knew that you were, right? So now all you have to do is show up and show out in style, remembering that dress is nothing more than the expression of a man's state of mind. So you, yeah, style. Next week. Peace.